All right, hello. This is the face behind the voice of philosophy by choice. Today I'm going to be continuing Karl Marx's Capital, Volume 1, Part 1, Commodities and Money, Chapter 1, Commodities. We'll be moving on to Section 2, the twofold character of the labor embodied in commodities. At first sight, a commodity presented itself to us as a complex of two things, use value and exchange value. Later on, we saw also that labor, too, possesses the same twofold nature, for, so far as it finds expression in value, it does not possess the same characteristics that belong to it as a creator of use values. I was the first to point out and to examine critically this twofold nature of the labor contained in commodities. As this point is the pivot on which a clear comprehension of political economy turns, we must go more into detail. Let us take two commodities such as a coat and 10 yards of linen, and let the former be double the value of the latter, so that if 10 yards of linen equals W, the coat equals 2W. The coat is a use value that satisfies a particular want. Its existence is the result of a special sort of productive activity, the nature of which is determined by its aim, mode of operation, subject, means, and result. The labor, whose utility is thus represented by the value in use of its product, or which manifests itself by making its product a use value, we call useful labor. In this connection, we consider only its useful effect. As the coat and the linen are two qualitatively different use values, so also are the two forms of labor that produce them, tailoring and weaving. Were these two objects not qualitatively different, not produced respectively by labor of different quality, they would not stand to each other in the relation of commodities. Coats are not exchanged for coats. One use value is not exchanged for another of the same kind. To all the different varieties of values in use, there corresponds as many different kinds of useful labor, classified according to the order, genus, species, and variety to which they belong in the social division of labor. This division of labor is a necessary condition for the production of commodities, but it does not follow, conversely, that the production of commodities is a necessary condition for the division of labor. In the primitive Indian community, there is social division of labor without production of commodities. Or, to take an example nearer home, in every factory, the labor is divided according to a system, but this division is not brought about by the operatives mutually exchanging their individual products. Only such products can become commodities with regard to each other, as result from different kinds of labor, each kind being carried on independently and for the account of private individuals. To resume then, in the use value of each commodity there is contained useful labor, i.e., productive activity of a definite kind and exercised with a definite aim. Use value cannot confront each other as commodities unless the useful labor embodied in them is qualitatively different in each of them. In a community, the produce of which in general takes the form of commodities, i.e., in a community of commodity producers, this qualitative difference between the useful forms of labor that are carried on independently of individual producers, each on their own account, develops into a complex system, a social division of labor. Anyhow, whether the coat be worn by the tailor or by his customer, in either case it operates as a use value, nor is the relation between the coat and the labor that produced it altered by the circumstance that the tailoring may have become a special trade, an independent branch of the social division of labor. Wherever the want of clothing forced them to it, the human race made clothes for thousands of years, without a single man becoming a tailor. But coats and linen, like every other element of material wealth, that is not the spontaneous produce of nature, with a capital N, must invariably owe their existence to a special productive activity exercised with a definite aim, an activity that appropriates particular nature-given materials to particular human wants. So far, therefore, as labor is a creator of use value, So far, therefore, as labor is a creator of use value, is useful labor, it is a necessary condition, independent of all forms of society, for the existence of the human race. It is an internal, nature-imposed necessity, without which there can be no material exchange between man and nature, again with a capital N, and therefore no life. The use values, coat, linen, etc., i.e., the bodies of commodities, are combinations of two elements, matter and labor. If we take away the useful labor expended upon them, a material substratum is always left, which is furnished by nature without the help of man. The latter can work only as nature does, that is, by changing the form of matter. Nay, more, in this work of changing the form, he is constantly helped by natural forces. We see then that labor is not the only source of material wealth, of use values produced by labor. As William Petty puts it, labor is its father and the earth is its mother. Let us now pass from the commodity considered as a use value to the value of commodities. By our assumption, the coat is worth twice as much as the linen, but this is a mere quantitative difference, which for the present does not concern us. We bear in mind, however, that if the value of the coat is double that of 10 yards of linen, 20 yards of linen must have the same value as one coat. So far as they are values, the coat and the linen are things of a like substance, objective expressions of essentially identical labor, but tailoring and weaving are, qualitatively, different kinds of labor. There are, however, states of society in which one and the same man does tailoring and weaving alternatively, in which case these two forms of labor are mere modifications of the labor of the same individual, and not special and fixed functions of different persons, just as the coat which our tailor makes one day, and the trousers which he makes another day, imply only a variation in the labor of one and the same individual. Moreover, we see at a glance that in our capitalist society, a given portion of human labor is, in accordance with the varying demand, at one time supplied in the form of tailoring, at another in the form of weaving. This change may possibly not take place without friction, but take place it must. Productive activity, if we leave out of sight its special form, viz., the useful character of the labor, is nothing but the expenditure of human labor power. Tailoring and weaving, though qualitatively different, productive activities are each a productive expenditure of human brains, nerves, and muscles, and in this sense are human labor. There are but two different modes of expending human labor power. Of course, this labor power, which remains the same under all modifications, must have attained a certain pitch of development before it can be expended in a multiplicity of modes. But the value of a commodity represents human labor in the abstract, the expenditure of human labor in general, and just as in society a general or a banker plays a great part, but mere man, on the other hand, a very shabby part, so here with mere human labor. It is the expenditure of simple labor power, i.e., of the labor power which, on an average, apart from any special development, exists in the organism of every ordinary individual. Simple, average labor, it is true, varies in character in different countries and in different times, but in a particular society it is given. Skilled labor counts only as simple labor intensified, or rather, as multiplied simple labor, a given quantity of skilled being considered equal to a greater quantity of simple labor. Experience shows that this reduction is constantly being made. A commodity may be the product of the most skilled labor, but its value, by equating it to the product of simple unskilled labor, represents a different quantity of the latter labor alone. The different proportions in which different sorts of labor are reduced to unskilled labor as their standard are established by a social process that goes on behind the backs of the producers and consequently appear to be fixed by customers. For simplicity's sake, we shall henceforth account every kind of labor to be unskilled, simple labor. By this we do more than save ourselves the trouble of making the reduction. Just as, therefore, in viewing the coat and linen as values, we abstract from their different use values, so it is with the labor represented by those values. We disregard the difference between its useful forms, weaving and tailoring. As the use values, coat and linen, are combinations of special productive activities with cloth and yarn, while the values, coat and linen, are, on the other hand, mere homogeneous congregations of undifferentiated labor, so the labor embodied in these latter values does not count by virtue of its productive relation to cloth and yarn, but only as being expenditure of human labor power. Tailoring and weaving are necessary factors in the creation of use values, coat and linen, precisely because these two kinds of labor are of different qualities, but only insofar as abstraction is made from their special qualities, only insofar as both possess the same quality of being human labor do tailoring and weaving form the substance of the values of the same articles. Coats and linen, however, are not merely values, but values of a definite magnitude, and according to our assumption, the coat is worth twice as much as the 10 yards of linen. Whence this difference in their values? It is owing to the fact that the linen contains only half as much labor as the coat, and consequently that in the production of the latter labor power must have been expended during twice the time necessary for the production of the former. So are they compounding then? While, therefore, with reference to use value, the labor contained in a commodity counts only qualitatively, with reference to value, it counts only qualitatively. Sorry, I'm going to start that again. While, therefore, with reference to use value, the labor contained in a commodity counts only qualitatively, with reference to value, it counts only quantitatively, and must first be reduced to human labor, pure and simple. In the former case, it is a question of how and what, in the latter of how much, how long a time. Since the magnitude of the value of a commodity represents only the quantity of labor embodied in it, it follows that all commodities, when taken in certain proportions, must equal in value. If the productive power of all the different sorts of useful labor required for the production of a coat remains unchanged, the sum of the values of the coats produced increases with their number. If one coat represents X days' labor, 2 coats represent 2X days' labor, and so on. But assume that the duration of the labor necessary for the production of the coat becomes doubled or halved. In the first case, 1 coat is worth as much as 2 coats were before. In the second, 2 coats are only worth as much as 1 was before, although in both cases, 1 coat renders the same service as before, and the useful labor embodied in it remains of the same quality. But the quantity of labor spent on its production has altered. An increase in the quantity of use values is an increase of material wealth. With 2 coats, I don't want you to be in the video, okay? Thanks. With 2 coats, 2 men can be clothed. With 1 coat, only 1 man. Nevertheless, an increased quantity of material wealth may correspond to a simultaneous fall in the magnitude of its value. This antagonistic movement has its origins in the twofold character of labor. Productive power has reference, of course, only to the labor of some useful concrete form, the efficacy of any special productive activity during a given time being dependent on its productiveness. Useful labor becomes, therefore, a more or less abundant source of products, in proportion to the rise or fall of its productiveness. On the other hand, no change in this productiveness affects the labor represented by value. Since productive power is an attribute of the concrete useful forms of labor, of course, it can no longer have any bearing on the labor, so soon as we make abstraction from those concrete useful forms. However, then productive power may vary. The same labor exercised during equal periods of time always yields equal amounts of value, but it will yield during equal periods of time different quantities of values in use, more if the productive power rise, fewer if it falls. The same change in productive power, which increases the fruitfulness of labor and in consequence the quantity of use values produced by that labor, will diminish the total value of the increased quantity of use values, provided such change shorten the total labor time necessary for the production, and vice versa. On the one hand, all labor is, speaking physiologically, an expenditure of human labor, and in its character of identical abstract human labor, it creates and forms the value of commodities. On the other hand, all labor is the expenditure of human power in a special form and with a definite aim, and in this, its character of concrete useful labor, it produces use values.